You know, one of the things that I enjoy about putting this event together is it gives me a chance to connect with some very interesting people and learn more about what's going on in the county. And we connected with the Contra Costa Water District, and in my conversation with Chris from the Water District, I got a completely new insight into a strategy for addressing water conservation.
Today I'd like to make the case for landscape water conservation. My name is Chris Dundon. I work for Contra Costa Water District. I've been there for too many decades, I don't even want to remember. And I manage the water conservation program. So let's talk first about landscape water cost. And my goal here is to talk a little bit about commercial HOA, so more of the commercial sort of realm, not residential, but it all applies. Water costs for HOAs, commercial businesses, can be one of their largest line items, second to their landscaper costs. It can be a huge, huge line item. And then there's the cost for the hidden costs from water waste, which can be huge as well, and I'm going to get into that in the second half of the talk. And I'm sorry to say, but water bills are going to continue to go up. Water in California is becoming more scarce. The cost of getting water to you becomes more expensive, and so water costs are going to go up. On a unit basis, it's still really cheap. It's about ½ penny a gallon. For our water quality, we pull our water out of the Delta, and we have one of the best treatment facilities in the country, and you still get that water for about ½ penny a gallon. So compare that to any other beverage, it's huge. But water waste continues in every landscape that we deal with in our service area here. Commercial properties, HOA properties, about half of their water, we did a little analysis of our commercial properties, about half of their water use goes to landscape. So all that highly treated water I talked about, we pump out of the Delta, we ship it to our Bowman treatment plant, we clean it up real nice, and we put it out into the tanks. Half of it is going into landscape, which is just, to me, a crime. I mean, it's just crazy. Average CCWD commercial account uses about 2 million gallons a year. So where is the waste? Well, first of all, leaks go unrepaired for years. Some customers just don't know they have leaks. I've been dealing with and Cooper's been dealing with a customer, with a commercial customer. They have, this is probably one of the biggest ones we've had, but they have had a leak going on 4 years now. They're using 40,000 gallons a day at this commercial business. I would say 3/4 of that is all waste. And we've only contacted them half a dozen times to tell this private business, you're spending $10,000 a month, or I'm sorry, $10,000 a billing period, so about $60,000 a year, that you shouldn't be. And they still haven't fixed it.
And what's the name of that business?
I'm not going to tell you. There's also insufficient equipment maintenance. So every property you've ever been on, if you're there when the sprinklers are on, you'll often see a broken head here or there. There's always going to that. So I don't want to throw the landscaper under the bus. They just can't keep them all fixed. But there's a level. If they go on for months broken, that's different than the following week coming back and repairing it. And then there's a poor equipment quality. Back in the 50s, there was a great sprinkler head invented called the Champion brass pop-up head. They made them out of brass. They pop up about ½ an inch. Well, when you grow your lawn about 2½ inches, that ½ an inch just doesn't cut it. So replacing those older equipment, use that as an example, with newer high efficiency models of equipment can get you that next level of efficiency. Because after all, water waste, in my mind, is money waste, and that's what we try and convey to our commercial customers. So this is, I think, my best slide. So if you're going to pay attention to one, pay attention to this one. I think I have a laser pointer. Okay, I'm going to use a HOA as an example here. Who's the bill payer and who's the water user? So the homeowners in an HOA are ultimately the bill payer. If you're in an HOA and you pay your dues, you're paying the water bill for all those common areas. And then you guys all elect this HOA board to make decisions to represent you. So the HOA board hires a property manager, and she in turn hires a landscape contractor to maintain the landscape, who has employees who are in the field who set the timer. This guy setting the timer is basically directly affecting these people's water bill. So who's using the water? The landscape maintenance company is using the water. They're responsible to set the controller. So if they decide, here we are November 1st, and they want to water 7 days a week, I love when I get one of the customers that do that. They're watering 6, 7 days a week in October, and I say, wow, and they go, well, it was 80 degrees. And I said, how many more days a week did you water in July? And they're like, well, there's no more days, so maybe the same. So they're also responsible for repairing irrigation problems. What they're not responsible for, and they're not paid to do that, is to pay the water bill. They're not responsible for water use. So they really don't care. It's not in their the realm of caring. In fact, what they really care about is keeping it green and keeping complaints down to a minimum, keeping the place looking good. So property owners need to, essentially property owners are giving that landscaper a blank check payable to Contra Costa Water District, and it's up to the landscaper to decide how many zeros they want to put on that check. And it's not, you know, when I'm in the finance department, so I have kind of an odd job. I report to the finance director, and she said, hey, you're taking away our revenue. And I said, we don't want revenue that way. She's joking, but we don't want revenue that way. We want efficient use and base our rates on that. So it's a very simple solution. Hire the landscaper to be responsible for managing the water. If you look at landscape contracts, they'll often say something to the effect of, you know, manage the water efficiently. But they're not paying them for that. It needs to be a full section in their contract and pay them for their time to do that. This is where it's, if it seemed like I'm throwing the landscaper under the bus, I'm really not, because the industry norm is to not pay them because the customers are not valuing that service. So adding water management to the landscape maintenance agreement, that is the solution. So what do you need to know to manage water? You got to know 3 things. You got to know what water meter supplies what landscape area. You got to figure out how much should I be using, and then you got to figure out how much did I use. So I'm going to kind of jump through those. Determining what water account supplies the landscape. There's a bit of work if you have a landscaper, if they're taking over a business that you have, they need to do an analysis. They need to measure the landscape area. We can help with that. They need to locate the meters. They need to do some other checks to see what valves are covering what areas. And by the way, Contra Costa Water offers a service to help them do this, at least do a full water audit of their property, and we do that for free. And East Bay Mud does the same. Step 2 is, how much should I water? And the answer is definitely not what I used last year. And I've come across this. I've had an accountant we talked to, and she says, well, this is about what we paid last year. And I said, how long have you been there? And she goes, 3 years. I gave her 10 years of data. 5 years ago, the water use jumped up significantly. They had a leak. So in her reality, her norm, that was normal, but it wasn't right. So basing it on what you used previously is not a good way to manage water. What you need to do is to develop a site-specific water budget, like you do for anything, an estimate of what you should be using, not based on past practice, but based on what the landscape needs. Most of the best landscape maintenance firms use this, and simply a water budget is, if you look out there, the lawn out there, if I measured the square footage, and let's say it's 1 acre, and I get a local weather station, which we have a lot of them, and it measures my favorite big word, evapotranspiration, which is a big word for saying how much water did the landscape use. You can measure that, so around here, on an annual basis, a lawn like that needs about 4 feet of water. So if that's an acre lawn out there, and it needs 4 feet in a year, that's 4 acre feet in a year, and I can divide that up by the months. It's a little more precise than that, but that's how you estimate your water budget, and so now you know how much you're supposed to use. So this is a budget report that we provide for customers. The green kind of shows what they should be using, and the blue was their actual consumption. So then step 3 is, how much do I use? This is not rocket science. This thing on the bottom here is a water meter. It looks like the odometer on your car. If every week you require your landscaper to read the meter, by the way, you already have your water budget, so you know how much every month you should be using, and you can put that into gallons per day. It's a nice, easy number. If every week they read the meter and do a little bit of math, or use Excel to do the math, you now can say, oh, My budget says I should be using 10,000 gallons a day on my giant HOA. The last week we've been using 40,000 gallons per day. It gives you something to go look into. And then you got to take action. So if you're within budget, you're probably good to go. But if you're not, you look at three things. You either look at the scheduling, that's the sprinkler timer. Oftentimes that's the culprit. They might be watering on 2 programs they didn't know about, or they're watering more days than they realized. Second one might be lots of broken equipment. They can look at that. Or it might be, like I said before, inefficient, older equipment where you can do a return on investment estimate to see, is it worth making those changes? Always recommend the landscaper should be walking the site regularly, turning on stations and looking at, and that should be part of the contract as well. But as the property owner, you need to go through and look at it as well. If not a couple times a year, at least once a year. So my coworker Cooper here, he has been in the field a lot in the last 5 years, and this is what he gets to see out there. Broken sprinklers, which emit a ton of water, curb and gutter, and you know where that ends up in the local streams. We see overspray all over the place. Now, sometimes you're going to have a little bit, and you can't, you know, you can't get rid of all of it. But when you have this kind of overspray, there's a huge amount of waste. It's all evaporating. Then, of course, there's broken irrigation lines, which really waste a lot, and they undermine the soil, and they can cause more property damage. These are all things on a regular walkthrough you can catch early. And then I think probably one of the biggest water wasters is high water pressure. So if you've ever seen sprinklers on and you see drift, you see sort of a fog, that's because the water pressure is too high. And it's a real simple fix. They can put a pressure regulator on each sprinkler head or back at the valve. But that water waste is probably, I would say, out of all of them, the most common, because if you're in an area with high pressure, that's what you get. Now I want to talk about the hidden costs of water waste. I think this is probably for businesses a bigger cost, and it doesn't come into their operating costs, it comes in later into their capital costs. Asphalt damage is one of the most common ones. So go to any shopping area and look at their parking lot islands or business park. That little 2.5-foot area there is probably irrigated by a sprinkler head that has a 15-foot radius. Do the math, right? So when you have that much overspray onto asphalt, you're going to get, the water's going to follow the path of least resistance, and that's where you're going to get your cracking. A good parking lot should last 20 years, 25 years. You'll find parking lots that have overspray constantly. And remember, this is happening 3 or 4 times a week if they're watering efficiently, 7 times a week if they're not. And then the asphalt turns 115 degrees here in summer, and it's that every day. That's what's ruining the asphalt. So that's a big cost line item. Fence damage. This is, you could call this artwork, but it's really not. Fence damage is huge. And if I had a property, and at my house I do this, I walk around, if the sprinklers are on, and I check my neighbors too, where you're going to get rot is where the soil gets wet. Well, of course, in the winter, it's going to get wet. You can't do anything about that. But if you're wetting that soil right at the base or wetting that the wood every day, and then it, again, gets 100 degrees in the day, you're going to rot that fence out. I don't think fence companies generally want you to keep the water off it because they get to replace them sooner, but you can have a fence for many more years. And then siding damage is probably one of the most costly. We don't see that as much, but people are pretty more aware if water's hitting their property or hitting their building, they're going to get it off. But the key is all of those, you should be walking the property with the sprinklers on it, and if any water's hitting one of those structures, it needs to be fixed. And then there's liability. Not that anyone in California would ever sue, however, if you have wet pavement where people are walking, you've increased your liability. And then, of course, environmental damage. All of that runoff that goes onto pavement ends up in a curb and gutter, and it goes to a local creek. And, you know, there's chlorine, there could be pesticides, there could be fertilizer in that water, so that's all going in a local creek, and that's really not a good thing. So with that, how do you find a contractor who can do the right thing? Well, first and foremost, make sure you put it in their agreement that they need to manage water. The California CLCA stands for California Landscape Contractors Association. That's the association that pretty much represents the big companies that do commercial properties. They have a fabulous certified water manager training, and they have really, really top-level training there. So you can get your contractor through them. A second one is called QL, which is Qualified Water Efficient Landscaper. That's probably a lower level one, but I think it's a really good one. If you've got a gardener at home and they can take this training, it really is going to make them better. And it's generally, the training is free. In fact, Contra Costa is going to look into offering the QL training in the future. But the bottom line is landscape water use can be efficient. It can be sustainable. It just needs the customer to ask for it and to require it and to pay their landscaper to perform that function. And with that, thank you. Leave it at that, or is there any questions?
So you have a lot of what we like to refer to as institutional knowledge. I would be curious how your organization's view of water has changed since you started, and what does that tell you about what you think you'll be working on in 30 years?
That's a great question. I started in 1991 as a temp, and if you guys remember, we had a pretty good drought that year and a couple years before that. We had one permanent person who was in charge of water conservation, was hired then. We now have 6 permanent people running water conservation, and our budget is considerably higher than it was back then. We were part of an organization that got started statewide called the California Urban Conservation Council. This was a really innovative partnership between water utilities in California and environmental organizations. The environmental organization said, you know what, this is in 91. We'll stop suing you if you guys commit to this thing called water conservation. And so it was an awesome partnership. And for all those years between 91 and now, we have grown conservation. We're responsible for high efficiency toilets now. That we helped basically kind of light the fire under that, washers as well. There's 2 organizations, another one called the Alliance for Water Efficiency. They're a national group. And then our group called the California Urban Conservation Council has just changed its name. We are now the California Water Efficiency Partnership, and we've changed our bylaws a little bit. Back to my organization, your question, water conservation is part of our water supply. That's what really changed. That means the engineers are behind it, and that's important in a water utility. If we look out 40 years, where's Contra Costa going to get our newest supply? When we're running out of water, where is it going to come from? It's going to come from 3 places. We're going to buy new supplies. That's the smallest segment. We're going to have more recycled water in the community here, and conservation. And conservation is probably about 35–40% of that. So basically, as we incrementally reduce water over the next 40 years, it's less we have to buy in the future. So yeah, it's come a long way. Where we're going to be in the future, water districts are going to all have smart meters at some point. Right now, we drive a truck out there, and then we walk, and every 60 days, we lift a concrete lid, we read the meter, we enter it into a device, and we bill you every 2 months. Smart meters, kind of like the PG&E ones, are going to give us data on an hourly basis. So we're then going to be able to convey to you, the consumer, how much you're using. And in fact, I can do that now, so if you want to write this down, if you're in Contra Costa Water, if you get your water from us, go to www.ccwater.com/mywaterreport. And that My Water Report is a portal for you to go in and see your own use going back 10 years. Right now, the data points are every 60 days because that's when we read your meter. In the future, you can see it down to an hour. And then you can set up alerts. So you can set up an alert that says, let me know if there's 24 years of water use constant, or let me know if my bill is going to be greater than what it was the prior bill. You can set up different alerts. That way you don't have to be a water geek like me and always want to be looking at it. You can get alerted when you need to do something. So that is definitely the future. So,
Chris, thank you, first of all, for pointing out how much bang for the buck there is in just adjusting the irrigation technology and getting the landscape managers to take responsibility for it. It looks like that's a huge contributor to savings and conservation. But I'm curious, what do you talk to businesses about plant selection? You know, I mean, we all know that lawns are a terrible choice from a water conservation perspective in California, but they have a lot of other advantages that businesses really want. So how are you dealing with that, and how do you see that in the future?
So we actually have a program called the Lawn to Garden Rebate Program, where we will pay you, the homeowner, or you, the business, $1 a square foot to take out water-thirsty lawn and sprinklers and put in water-wise plants and drip. We did, in the peak of the drought, our little water district did 1 million square feet in 1 year. It was huge. And we're one of many districts from San Diego to the Oregon border who are offering these programs. And the state of California has a rebate right now as well. There is a big push to have what we refer to as a new norm in landscaping. And for me to kind of mentally get my arms around it, if I randomly selected 100 people and said, quickly, tell me what a front yard looks like. Right now, most people would say, or maybe 5 years ago, most people would say, oh, it's a lawn with maybe a couple of birch trees and some maybe plants at the base of the house. I want that to change to be, well, it could be native plants, and it could be this, and it could be that. It could be a variety thing. It could be a succulent garden. We need to sort of change that ethic for what's acceptable in a front yard. And it's definitely happening. I think our rebate program is placing some beautiful examples. In fact, if you go to ccwater.com and go to our conservation section, you can see photos, before and after photos of, I think we have maybe 30 of them now. We got another 20 slides ready to go soon, but you can see some beautiful lawn conversions. And it's pretty inspiring. So I think that's where we got to go.
I've got a question in that regard. On the xeriscaping.
Yep.
So many years ago, I did it in my yard, one of the first ones in my neighborhood, which had pristine lawns and Hummers at the time. Since then, many people have converted. I've gone maybe one step further where now I'm doing fruit trees as well, which, in suburbia has always been sort of a no-no because they were considered dirty or attracted pests or whatever the case may be. But one thing that did occur to me, and I think that the $1 rebate is phenomenal, but have you actually gone back into like a neighborhood where you've got high penetration of xeriscaping and looked at the before and after water usage and come up with statistics that are real based on, actually looking at specific houses that changed? And how does it work out? Are we getting the bang for the buck there?
So we are. We did and I'm due to do another study for sure. Several years back, we grabbed a group, and I looked at 3 years. I actually got it to 4 years of data for that one select group. I had 50 homes, and the tough part is my data went right into the drought. So it's kind of, but basically we were looking at about 50 gallons per day per home savings. So the savings are there for sure. I think what my worry is, and my worry is, I want to make sure we're getting beautiful front yards going in. And I have to be honest, our program has a good chunk of those that are beautiful, and then there's some that are not so. And I don't want a lousy looking lava rock with a couple of dead plants being the poster child of my program. However, that one saved even more water. So I'm dealing with that, but there is definite savings. There's a statewide savings study going on right now that we're not part of, but we're going to see if we can get involved in that. And then there's the other benefits. There's the reduced runoff benefits. City of Santa Monica, or Santa Monica Water, has I think it's like a 15-year trial going on. 2 identical homes next to each other. One of them has a traditional landscape, one has a xeriscape, water-wise landscape, both managed by the same gardener, and they track everything from pounds of fertilizer, how many minutes the blower was on, everything, and water use, of course. And they've got this ongoing study, and it's proving that the sustainable landscape is much better. The next level in we're just offering for water-wise landscape, and we have certain criteria. The next level after that is a watershed approach to the landscape, where you keep all of the water on your property, including the downspouts. So you have bioswales so that you can slow it, spread it, and sink that winter water, which then replenishes the groundwater so that your trees have something the following summer. So there's sort of an evolution, but we kind of got to go baby steps into it. You have a question?
Pretty much you are touching upon what I was going to be asking. I think my follow-up question would be, how are you really, I live in a neighborhood, Colony Park in Concord, and a lot of us have transferred, done our part in the, to do our lawns. But what I noticed is that, like the school district right behind my house, I don't think that their watering is very efficient. They have a big water spout that comes up, a couple times a week, and it just, the spout goes, maybe it is efficient, I don't know, but the spout goes in the air about 15 feet, like an arc, and it like rains down, I get, but it seems to me like that might be there might be something better for them to use. And then the industrial parks close by, I'm not noticing that they are using or converting to water-wise plants, and so I'm just curious about what the outreach is, particularly for businesses, and if there are any, mandates for newly constructed business parks and or high-density housing for water-wise and natives.
So I'll start with the last part of the question. Yes, there are mandates. The state of California has a water-efficient landscape ordinance that it updates every 5 years, and they're currently updating it now. You're not going to ever see turf grass in medians again. And in fact, the governor, with his drought declaration and the long-term conservation regulations that are going to be going into effect, you're going to see very little turf grass in medians, and you're going to have to see actually existing stuff come out. So we'll probably work with some of the cities to try and facilitate that. So new landscapes, there's a really high level of efficiency they require. So for new stuff, it's there. For existing, you said for businesses or the school district, we do outreach to them. But if you see obvious water waste, we have a water waste hotline you can call, which I can't think of the number right now, but you can go on our website and definitely get to it, or call Cooper. He'd love to take your call. But if you give us a call about water waste, we address it. And here's how we do it. Even if it's your neighbor, we generally come out to the homeowner. So if we ever come to you and we say, oh, one of our trucks was driving by and we saw this water waste, know that your neighbor actually ratted you out. But it works. And we have a very, very high improvement rate when we talk to a customer. It gets fixed. So feel free to let us know.
Last question.
No. He was just saying 5 minutes.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, thank you, Chris. That was terrific.